Welcome to Faith Unfolds, a podcast for ministry, biblical studies, and Christian living. I'm your host, Kevin Burr. Joining me today is campus missionary for the University of Delaware, Casey Coston. Casey, it's good to see you, sir. How are you today?
Hey, brother. Good, good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we were talking earlier that it's actually colder in Searcy, Arkansas than it is in Delaware. Is that what you were saying?
That's right. Yeah, I can't complain to my fellow Arkansans today.
That's right. You are originally from Arkansas, is that right?
That's right. Pine Bluff, Whitehall, Monticello. I was a Southeast Arkansas guy.
Okay, okay, yeah. I'm glad you specified where that was in Arkansas because I immediately was thinking Northwest Arkansas. But you went to the University of Arkansas for undergrad, right?
That's right. Got the chemical engineering degree. Had a great campus ministry experience at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville.
Okay. Well, Casey, you have written a new book called "Made Competent: A Story About Life and Ministry," and that is available now. I will put a link to that in the description. Basically, what you have done with your book is to show how God has led you and provided for you and all the work that He's called you to do throughout a now 20-year career in campus ministry. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you got this whole thing going and why now, right? Why write this book now?
Yeah. So yeah, I went to University of Arkansas. I was good at math and science. Some of my great church family in Pine Bluff, the Hazel Street Church of Christ, kind of encouraged me to go to Harding, but I was a band guy in math and science, and I wanted to be a Razorback. So, went to university and just had a great experience. Was in the campus ministry, freshman year, all 4 years. And engineering was okay, but I just didn't really connect my passion, for life, and seeing how, there are engineers without borders now. And if I'd known about that, maybe that'd be different. But
Mhm.
I just didn't connect, my engineering work to my heart. And the campus ministry was connecting, my heart very much. And Scott Carnes was my campus minister and just provided just a great atmosphere for me to grow. And the campus ministry was thriving. And we just had a really blessed, 4 years there. And that led me to decide to go into ministry. And my parents were supportive. I told them in between my final two senior semesters, December 1999, told my parents, and I'm sure they were a little nervous, but they were supportive. Finished the degree, but went to Abilene Christian for my MDiv and kind of lost track of campus ministry out in the wilderness there. Kind of forgot about it. But by the time I started looking for jobs, Scott had connected me with the opportunity at Ole Miss. And yeah, I did 15 years at Ole Miss, and a lot of things changed at the end of my time there at Ole Miss that forced me to look elsewhere. And God had a great opening for my family in Delaware, so we've been in Delaware now for 5 years.
Yeah. Now, when you say that you maybe kind of lost sight a little bit of campus ministry, that surprises me, Casey, because it was a campus ministry that led you to start thinking about ministry. Talk to me a little bit about that, if you can.
Yeah, and I tried to be very gracious with my ACU time because I loved it. I
Yeah.
loved all the stuff that I did while at ACU, but this is uh, unfortunately part of our Christian school story is that there's not much contextualization for campus ministry. So I don't recall any campus ministry contextualization while I was at ACU. So, after 3.5 years, 9, 9, 10, 12 hours a semester,
Mhm.
I just lost track. I mean, obviously it was still in there, and I
Mhm.
remembered why I went into ministry, but I just wasn't getting any kind of future focus towards campus ministry, and so it kind of fell off the radar until the Ole Miss
Yeah.
job, came up.
So a lot of training for, like preaching and teaching and other kind of like understanding ministry in a congregate like a traditional congregational setting.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
All of which is incredibly valuable. I mean, I got the same kind of stuff from my MDiv
yeah.
when I went to HST. But yeah, you're right. Casey, let me pitch something to you. Why is it that campus ministry It appears to be the best kept secret in in full-time ministry in Churches of Christ. I mean, I was interested, right before I took that job in Corpus Christi. I had gone and interviewed for a campus ministry position, and God made it clear that I I could have enjoyed that ministry. I could have been effective there, but he was kind of leading us towards somewhere else. But you know, that was not something that I heard a lot of people talk about. Why is it campus ministry just sort of an unknown entity for a lot of folks? What do you think?
Yeah. Obviously there's just less uh churches associated with a college campus.
Okay.
I guess if you were to think of the 10 or 20 main colleges in Arkansas, for example, there'd just be 10 to 20 churches that are right there located by those universities.
Mhm.
And so if there's, hundreds of churches in Arkansas, you can just see that, you're dealing with a smaller pool of
Sure.
churches that see the university, see the college students come and leave, every semester. So yes, some of it is it's just not in front of us. And it is, part of the challenge of campus ministers is to try and encourage more buy-in because obviously plenty of our sons and daughters go to our Christian schools, but
Sure.
plenty of our sons and daughters go to, any public university, community college,
Mhm.
and in Campus for Christ, which is our Church of Christ campus ministry organization. We have a national conference every summer. Our mission is to try and get the word out, and it is challenging because we can't get to every church. And our Christian schools, thankfully, with Chris Buxton at Harding there,
His office
he's
is right next to mine.
oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's training some interns every semester. He
Mhm.
teaches the campus ministry class, I think most semesters. He's doing some work for us at Lipscomb now. So we're really thankful to have Chris advocating for us. It just takes more advocates and more time and energy to try and, get the word out that your sons and daughters are leaving our youth ministries. But where are they going? Where are they ending up? If they don't go to our Christian schools, then we would love to have more help, reaching them at the public universities.
Yeah. I have noticed even here in Searcy, which, being a Nashvilleian by birth, I like to think of Nashville as the buckle of the Bible Belt. An argument can be made that Searcy is maybe a buckle of the Bible Belt as well. I've noticed that even here, something very different has happened since I was a freshman here 20 years ago. Man, you
Hmm.
talk earlier before we started recording, you talking about being old. It's like I'm feeling it too. I don't remind my wife very often that I turned 40 this year.
Yeah.
But I've noticed too that when I was a freshman here, there was virtually no awareness that I had or that my friends had of local churches having anything like a campus ministry. Now,
Right.
to be fair to those churches that did actually have something like that, like one in particular across the street, um, that's just because I was unaware of it doesn't mean that it was non-existent. But I am now personally aware of three of our larger churches in Searcy who have dedicated on-staff campus ministers who
Mhm.
are a regular presence. And I suspect that their job here in Searcy is maybe a little different than yours is or was in Oxford or is in Delaware. But I've seen a real concerted push, especially, those guys show up in chapel, they come and talk to classes. Um, Bible classes here, especially with freshmen. Something has happened even here in Searcy, where
Yeah.
there's a real need for that kind of thing. Casey, can you talk a little bit about what has happened in the last several years for people to see, hey, maybe this is something really valuable that we should invest in or at least be aware of.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I like to wrestle with is, unfortunately, this we could go down a theology rabbit hole here, but the understanding of kingdom and church is helpful. And I know in churches of Christ, sometimes we equate kingdom and church. And I tend to think, that the kingdom is bigger than, at least certainly bigger than the local church. And so I think having this kingdom mentality understanding that we want God's will to be done on earth as is in heaven, wherever that is. And so wherever a local church can participate in a larger kingdom vision that includes, yeah, college students, because as I mentioned to you, your episode on Churches of Christ in decline and minister shortages, we know there's a problem. And what I feel like I'm hoping to do with my book is to try and present one opportunity for us to figure out how to raise up a new generation of ministers,
Mhm.
raise up more Christians and churches, for us coming out of this. So it really is a challenge to try and get us to think big picture kingdom stuff and not just focus on our congregation, which is obviously important. But if you were to put a percentage on it, maybe some of us are spending 95% of our time thinking about our local congregation. What if we just did 75-25, and gave 25% of our time to thinking about, and of course, we have a lot of great international missions. We just need more of
Mhm.
our churches to think, well, what about the domestic mission field? What about the American college student, and how do we
Mhm.
reach them? Because that is a great mission field still in our backyard.
Yeah. So much of what one of the main things that I've really come to learn during my time in congregational ministry was to be faithful with what God had given me, you know. And I'm sure, with your 2 decades now in campus ministry, I'm sure you've had those times where you thought, um, I've got this event or I've got this Bible study, and if I could get this handful of people, because they've got these great gifts and they seem to be on fire for the Lord and they're likable, like if I could get these people here, then oh man, like how great would it be, right? Like if I could get them, if I could have this right mix that I see, then wow, this event or this ministry would be so successful, it would be so effective. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And eventually I just had to realize the hard lesson of, and if they don't show up, God still expects me to be faithful with who has shown up and who
Yeah,
is there.
yeah.
And so
And
that's,
that's
yeah.
a great, thing that I wrestle with throughout the book is attraction ministry versus discipleship. And I think certainly in our southern churches, we have bigger churches in general, we have bigger, groups of people to work with.
Hmm.
It can still be very tempting to focus on attraction-based events. And I talk about that in my story. I did that at Ole Miss. I focused very much on attraction and events a lot. And just like events, even just the big Bible studies. And I wasn't too focused on the one-on-ones and the small groups. And I flipped that. I flipped the script here in Delaware, and I believe just modeling it off Jesus's ministry, that certainly he engaged the 5,000, and certainly he was interruptible for a variety of good conversations and causes, but he primarily focused his life on 12 people.
Hmm.
And so one of the phrases I use a lot here now is just invest in a few. And so I'm still getting ready for a dinner and discussion on Tuesday night here, but I evaluate my success now way more on, have I met with 4, 5, or 6 students this week? Have I met with my team to talk about where they're at and just encourage them in their spiritual development and who they're connecting with? So I'm really trying to invest in a few now and not get too caught up in the attraction-based events, um, because even if those are successful, most of the time, I'm not sure how spiritually effective they are.
Yeah.
When you think about preaching to or even just take your class, I mean, how many do you have in a class
I've
these
got
days?
50 in my freshman class, and that's my largest class this
Yeah,
semester.
and you have no doubt, surely, hopefully, a better audience that's engaged and connecting.
They do a pretty good job.
Yeah,
Nobody's
yeah.
perfect, right? But they do a pretty good job. I'm very proud of them.
Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, you're in a great place raising up the next generation. But I hope we can see that, we might be more effective meeting with 1 or 2 people weekly than trying to, in campus ministry at least, teaching 50 people a weekly Bible class may not be paying as many dividends as we think. And so it is a great challenge to at least wrestle with that issue and just see where you're at, how effective you think you're being.
Yeah. Let me actually just dig into the nitty-gritty with that a little bit. Casey, why is it more effective? I mean, we could point to Jesus and say, yeah, Jesus did it. But
Yeah.
why is a less why is a more narrow focus
Yeah.
just more effective in doing what you're wanting to do, doing what
Right.
God is leading you to do?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it really took some help from Steve Shadrach is one of our campus ministry mentors. He's not doesn't have a Church of Christ background, but just a really solid guy. He's in Fayetteville. He wrote a book, The Fuel and the Flame, and he's got a great illustration in there. And I've seen this. There's a short YouTube video about it. Just it's the difference between addition and multiplication.
Okay.
And Jesus knew that multiplication was the way to change the world. It was the way to reach the world. Our addition ministry, so he gives the example of Billy Graham, preached to 1,000 people a day for the rest. At some point, he has all the numbers in there, but he would never reach the world, even converting 1,000 people a day. But if you disciple one person for a year, and that person then starts to disciple someone in year two, and you start a new person in year two, that multiplication, exponential growth would reach the world in like 30 something years. So it is a mentality of multiplication that I just wasn't trained in. That wasn't part of my MDiv. Uh, and again, maybe it's American Christianity. I'm sure it's all Christianity at some point. We're just kind of always tempted by, man, if I can preach to 50 or preach to 100 or a few hundred, that's where it's at. And I just again don't think that's paying off the dividends we think it is.
Yeah. I I want us to, say that we can baptize, a dozen people every Sunday. What I hope that that turns into is a dozen people who are absolutely in for the Lord and they are
Yeah,
transformed and they are filled with the Spirit and they are increasingly Christ-like. Um, Anecdotally, you and I know that that doesn't tend to happen to that degree of success,
right.
you know. And so the attraction model is, it can get people really excited, right? It's like, yeah, man, we had 100 kids at our youth rally, and that's awesome. That's wonderful. The trick is to never stop with just the event or just the Bible study or the thing like that. It's always to go further with them. And at a practical level, I can't do that with 100.
Right.
There's probably 7 or 8, maybe 10 or so students here that if I were to say, yeah, I think it would be accurate to describe my relationship with this student as mentor-mentee relationship.
Mhm.
Like, beyond just the time we meet in the classroom, but outside the classroom, that there's actually a more substantial mentor-mentee relationship there. And I've got, maybe 100 students total. And like about 10% of that. Did I do that math right? You're the math guy, Casey. Um, like 10% of that
That's right.
is a
That's
group
right.
that I feel like I can be more effective with. Casey,
And
what
that's
else? To keep rolling with this. I like where this is going.
yeah, so I just affirm you for just kind of recognizing, you can't effectively connect with 100 people on a regular relational basis, but you can connect with about 10% of that. And that's the goal. And again, I just want to stress we still do attraction events in Delaware, but I
Sure. Yeah.
really try and make sure they are a catalyst
Mhm.
for deeper connection with the few that are willing to come back after that attraction event. And so, yeah, we always do a waffle event. We get 100, something folks to come by for a waffle. I'm just looking for the 5 or 10 that are going to stick around, that might come back the next week when there's not waffles and go,
Mhm.
okay, 'cause, 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 okay, we now have an opportunity to go deeper, and so we're all just looking for those ways to do that. So one of the things that I just really wanted to emphasize, as I mentioned with your episode on church decline and minister shortages, is, I feel like we need a new story. We need a story that can kind of capture our imagination and try and kind of lift up our eyes to the hills a little bit to see that maybe God is doing something and can use our stories. So um, one of the things I try to encourage with the story, of course, is that in our audience, the great thing is that a church member can read this book and at least appreciate their ministers better and just realize, sometimes unfortunately we treat our ministers as like manufacturers, that they're just pumping out lessons for us. They're giving
Hmm.
us Bible studies. We don't know about their struggles unless they're very, vulnerable. And then sometimes they get in trouble for being too vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like we want
Yeah.
we want the Superman kind of mentality sometimes. And then of course elders, I talk about in the book my struggle with my elders at times at Ole Miss. And I say, near the end, every eldership should have to really kind of wrestle with uh, asking their ministers to leave, which is they asked me to resign, which was just never thought that was going to be on my radar. And so I said, they told me they wrestled with it, and I said, good. That's what every eldership should have to do is wrestle with. This is a family, this is a human being. This. Most of them have a family. We are now asking them, to leave, and they're going to have to go out and yeah, us moving to Delaware was hard. We got here before COVID, thankfully, and then we settled in and just tried to survive the pandemic. And it was certainly a hard 2 years just with the transition to Delaware. So every eldership needs to wrestle with that. And of course, I wanted current ministers to be encouraged by a story like this and resonate with many of these issues. Even though it is a campus ministry story, I think it is bigger than campus ministry. And I think hopefully just about anybody in full-time ministry will hear a lot of overtones, in the story. They're like, the names are different, but I know somebody, in my
Yeah.
context that's like that.
Yeah.
And then of course with your audience, man, we just want students that are thinking about ministry, our older teens, 17 and 18-year olds, our seminary students, our college, just our undergrad college students, they need a story that could help them see the opportunities and count the cost for what it's going to take. And hopefully with 20 years and 20 years of data and my story, they'll see God's faithful. Even though it was certainly hard at many times, God was very faithful and still taking good care of us here in Delaware.
Yeah. Casey, I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask you, and they go in different directions. So let me pitch both of them to you, and then we can do whichever in whatever order you would
Yeah.
like. One, um, I think it's fair to say that probably most of my audience is rooted somewhere within the Bible Belt in the
Hmm.
U.S. And so I am aware that there at least appear to be cultural differences in the South and how church operates in the South. And so I'd like to ask, you know, what kinds of challenges do you face by being in a place like Delaware versus, going to school in Arkansas, going
Hmm.
to seminary in Abilene, and then working in ministry in Mississippi?
Yeah.
So like what's actually different? Are there major differences or are those sometimes blown out of proportions? That's one question. Another question is, um, you know, give us some, could you give us some specifics of like what were the kinds of things what are the kinds of things that you would want to say to folks who are or that you think should go into ministry? I know what I say to students here, and I can mention that later. But what specifically would you want to say? What specific encouragement would you want to give folks who are interested in ministry? Here's what you need to look for. Here's what you should pray about. Here's maybe a sign
Yeah.
that God is calling you to this. So two very different questions, and I'll leave them to you, sir, to do with what you will.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's start with the last one there. So,
Okay.
uh, the first section of my book is just called Calling. And so I think my experience was I was planning to go into engineering, and I feel like God got my attention and called me into full-time ministry. I don't know if that is, I'm sure that's not 100% the way everybody gets into ministry, but I would just say one of the best things you can do is like look for the burning bushes in your life and just pay attention and see what God's doing.
What did that
If
call look like? Because
Yeah,
I could describe what it looked like for me and have in a recent episode, but I'm interested, Casey, what can you speak specifically? Like what was it? What made you think maybe maybe a financially healthy career of engineering is not exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe it's
that's
something
right.
else.
That's right. So a big thing there was I was by my junior senior year because financially, yeah, things were going great with engineering. I had an internship, was getting paid well, getting scholarships, all that was working out. But I paid attention to my heart, and I noticed that as I said maybe at the beginning, my heart was not really into it. I was doing the
Mhm.
hard work, staying up late, doing all the engineering stuff, but I just didn't really like it. And so that kind of caused me to then, of course, look, well, I'm loving campus ministry here. I'm loving being with my brothers and sisters. I love giving devos. I love praying for my friends,
Mhm.
leading small group Bible studies in the dorms. So I found that my heart was connecting. I still had the brain for it. I still loved, Bible study and, wanting to do some of those things. But I just found a more consistent connection between head and heart when I looked at doing ministry as opposed to engineering.
Would you
So
say
that's a
that
great one.
would you say that peace was involved? Like, did you when you started thinking about it, was you like, this just actually kind of makes sense, you know? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a good, what I'd say in that chapter called Second Conversion, because I felt like this was a second conversion for me, going from engineering to ministry, is it really did feel like uh fire or burning,
Mhm.
like the Jeremiah thing, like the guys on the road to Emmaus.
Mhm.
We're not our hearts burning within us. You kind of get a spiritual heartburn that you're like, wait a minute, you feel it. I mean, there's something in your chest, there's something in your head, and it was definitely experiential. Uh, it was not old school Church of Christ, doctrine that was winning me over.
Sure, yeah.
I had that foundation, and then I say, I was just having very simple but very powerful experiences of leaving Walmart one night and the Salvation Army, bucket was there. And I don't think I'd ever put any change in the Salvation Army bucket before. And that night I put the change in the bucket. And for like a split second, I was like so happy, so proud that I had given, my 42 cents into the bucket. And then, I mean, just out of nowhere, it just felt like not audible, but just God like spoke into my mind and heart and was just like, really, Casey? You think that's what's going to change the world? And he said, I don't want your money, I want you. And it was just like, not audible, but just so clear that God was trying to get my attention. This was my senior year, that God was doing things that was just kind of preparing me. And again, those were like burning bush moments for
Mhm.
me, where I just like, wait, it just feels like God is doing something different than what I've been preparing for so far. So I just want, students to pay attention to that, make sure that head and heart are connected and lined up with what you're doing in school, and just be noticing, hey, is God getting my attention with some experiences in my life that are a little different from what I'm used to.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to make some assumptions, but I know these kinds of stories well enough to where I think it's maybe better to say that these are reasonable inferences, not a necessary inference, but a reasonable inference. A reasonable inference. That part of the reason why you were probably even spiritually sensitive to the degree that you could, discern God is actually pushing me in some way.
Hmm.
Part of the reason that you were sensitive enough to be able to discern that is because you were regularly in worship, you were regularly in the Word, you were regularly in prayer, you were regularly in the spiritual communion with with the Lord's body.
Right.
It
Right.
like it is that fair to say? Like, does that accurately describe your experience?
I think so. And I think that's why I tried to say that to me, I would imagine most people, these are simple things, maybe a little strange to some people, but just
Mhm.
simple things that I felt like God did because I was already tracking, with God. I had my own relationship with Jesus. I was trying to follow Jesus on the University of Arkansas campus. And so God was like, okay, let me just drop this little next thing in there for you to see. So yeah, I think I think God's can certainly he has to take more drastic steps with people sometimes when he needs to. Saul seemingly was, thought he was on the right track, and God really had to, get his attention in a different way to kind of jolt him out of, the zealous path he was on at the time. So
Mhm.
it can be a big thing, but it hopefully if you're tracking with Jesus, there'll be some little things God will do, yeah, to get you just even more aware of what he's doing.
Yeah, yeah. For me. It was again 2009, and I mentioned this in a recent episode. It was 2009, and that summer, um, I was praying really intensely for a couple of things. One, I was uh, befriending the woman that I would come to marry. Um, we'd known each other for several years before that, but and I had tried to ask her out a couple of years before to spectacularly disastrous results. And so I was like, all right, I
Playing hard
don't
to
want
get.
to. What's that?
He's just playing hard to get.
Yeah, that's if only, right? If only. I was playing the long game for like 5 years, but I I did not want to. I didn't want to get hurt. I didn't want to make a mistake or anything like that. So I was just, I was needing to grow. I mean, essentially that's what it was. I was just needing to grow. But I was also, again, in the midst of a degree program, like you were with engineering,
Yeah,
and thinking, man, I, I could do this. I could teach high school history and social studies. But what I really, really miss, what just really gets me pumped is Bible study. Like
yeah,
I love I love studying the Greek New Testament,
yeah.
it was stuff like that. And I think because I had gotten to a point where I was praying like I should. That was probably why I was able to discern and take what was a big step to say, I'm gonna finish what I'm doing here in Cersei. And I got 4 more years at least in Memphis there at HST, and then maybe onto a PhD after that. Yeah, that
Right.
was because I was there. I was spiritually at a place where God needed me to be, so I could then pick up on His call, on His push.
That's right. And I think just identifying, I mean, you had a good desire there. And I think sometimes like because I've really tried to wrestle with this in scripture, First Peter talks about sinful desires. And so that just helps remind me there are good desires. God gave us desire. Desire is a good thing. And often it's going to get twisted into something bad. But it's good to pay attention, like, wait a minute, that's a good desire. If I was to become a teacher, professor, go down this long academic path, that's a good desire. That's a noble cause, for the kingdom. And I think trying to affirm that there are good desires and paying attention to those is so critical for, our young people now.
Yeah. Casey, what else would you say to somebody who is maybe needing some encouragement to think about ministry? Is ministry even a viable career? Is it worth it? What would you say about all that?
Yeah, yeah. So let me give one like practical thing that comes to mind is for parents and maybe current ministers and churches, there's the concern about financial security. And I am not I'm not saying that I am financially secure in maybe the ways I would have been in engineering, I'm sure.
Sure.
But Oxford Church of Christ took great care of me. But one of the things I learned that I feel like God was preparing me there for what I'd be able to do in Delaware was I started learning to raise money for our internships and apprenticeships at Ole Miss through Shadrach's uh, fundraising ministry that he does online. I think it's called VIA now, VIA. And but he's got a book called The God Ask, and I did the boot camp training. It was a couple of intense days. I call it an introvert's nightmare. I mean, it's just like you're supposed to cold call a few people, but they train you to do all this work to raise money. But I raised over $30,000 at Ole Miss for this ministry so that we could make disciples and raise up interns and apprentices. And by the time it came for me to move to Delaware, one of the things the Delaware folks said was, now you're going to have to raise part of your salary because our local church here, can't afford to pay a full-time preacher and a full-time campus minister. And I know that without that fundraising piece that I had already gotten at Ole Miss, I would have balked at that. I would have been like, ooh, yeah, I'm not sure I can even consider that. So one of the things that I've got a chapter on fundraising and then just see how that comes up in Delaware is now I have that mostly that group of donors that walked with me at Ole Miss. I have continued to walk with me in Delaware, and now they support me and my family financially, and they partner with the local church. So we have a great partnership
Mhm.
that allows the Newark Church to do what they can do, and my donors more than make up the difference. And I'm well taken care of in Delaware. And so you learn that there are resources out there. So, I don't know exactly how it's going to work for preachers and youth ministers out and even other campus ministers, but just to know that there are tools out there,
Mhm.
there's resources that could help the finances not be a deal breaker. So if a preacher's like, I can see how this is, I don't know if it's harder for a preacher or not. It's just when you start becoming a missionary, you think differently. So we were talking about titles a little bit.
Yeah.
I've,
Campus
I,
missionary
yeah,
is your is what you call yourself, yeah?
that's right. you know, there is no wrong title. I just felt like campus minister was a little more like static. It was kind of focused on Christians, which I think is great. But campus missionary just kind of allows me to think more like a missionary. And of course, missionaries have to raise funds,
Mhm.
for their ministries. And so if you kind of even if a preacher could envision themselves as a missionary in that local community for that church to reach the lost, that gives you a little bit more of a missional impulse to your life. And so if the church is dying, shrinking, and you just the elders, somebody comes to you and you had that painful story about the elders not giving a guy a raise in one of your stories, just
Mhm.
saying, now, again, yeah, you would have to do some work to get the elders on board with raising support, which I get. I had to do that at Oxford with my elders because it's a new thing for most of them.
Mhm.
But praise God, my Oxford elders let me do that, and the Newark elders are like, you got to do that. So I'm hoping that this is going to help our ministries either survive or hopefully thrive when we see that we can do some fundraising through our friends and family and supporters that God has put in our lives that want us to succeed and have the resources to help us.
Yeah.
So I know I answered specifically there. Remind me if I need to go another direction more.
No, that's all right. You before we started recording, you'd mentioned something that I'd said in a previous episode that it's amazing how God will prepare you for something before you even know you need it.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
it like that without saying that so much, that's precisely what you described
that's right.
as your, time in Oxford. God had prepared you with these gifts and skills and really a network. I've been encouraging my students here, think about your degree, yes, as training for what you're going to do, but also think about it as an opportunity to build skills, resources, and particularly a network.
Yeah,
Build a network that will that you can be a blessing to, and vice versa, that they can be a blessing to you
That's right.
during your time here. And that seems like that's what happened with you.
That's right. And just a real put a number to it for people to hopefully hang on to this. If you had 10 people in your network, 10 supporters, most of the let's those 10 would most likely give $100 a month to your ministry if you ask them. And that's $12,000 a year right now, right
Mhm.
there, you know? So it's you can see how, if you make 50,000 a year, but you're the only, you only on one salary, you need a little extra help, ask your church leaders, hey, could I go find, 10 supporters that would help supplement my income since that's all, this is all the church can do. That's okay. You just see that, yeah, God's opening doors. There's more opportunities there.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say to like to your class, to people at Harding and thinking about full-time ministry is the idea of incompetence that I deal with in the book so
Mhm.
much and talk about being made competent. So this comes from Second Corinthians chapter 2. Paul talks about we are made competent as ministers of a new covenant. Um, I'm a first generation minister. I don't know how many, students that come through Harding are first, if they're going into ministry, how many of them are first generation? I can see how Tracy, my wife, her parents were in ministry, and the things we do in campus ministry, she gets it. She understands, hey, we need to have some students over, we need to do a meal, we need to have a game night at our house, we need to try and do some things. She gets it because of what her parents did. For me, it was just like it has been all new,
Mhm.
as a first generation minister. And so a lot of incompetence learning some of what I should be doing. I want to be careful using the word should, because that's up for debate depending on who you talk to. And that's why I talk about my
Yeah.
growth reviews. I had members and elders and students all trying to tell me what I should do, and it's really hard to figure out. Well, I can't do all that, so what am I going to do?
Right. Mhm.
So you really feel the incompetence, and this is just where when Paul says, I'm not sure we think we've grasped it, but we need to meditate it on it, weekly or monthly at least. Is that Second Corinthians 12? He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And if you could take out weakness and put in incompetence, I think that it would
Hmm.
resonate really well here.
Mhm.
Because Paul, so Casey, accept your incompetence. You're a first generation minister. You're learning on the job. I didn't have an apprenticeship. We're doing apprenticeships in Delaware. I had great campus ministry experience as a student, but it's different to apprentice, in a ministry. So I was kind of learning on the job.
Mhm.
And so, man, I've said, the first 6 to 8 years, I just felt a lot of incompetence. But I had a really good elder who encouraged me, and there were a lot of other good things going on. But it was just, yeah, a lot of incompetence. And so when Paul gets to the point, with the hardships, the insults, the persecutions, the difficulties, for when I'm weak, then I am strong. For when I am incompetent, God makes me competent. So it's all training, and in some churches, elders, have less patience for your incompetence. But the
Sure.
Oxford Church was very patient with me for most of my time there, and I feel like I've grown. Now that I'm in Delaware, I kind of have reset, still incompetent, but I feel like God has. Now a 20-year-old tree instead of a 1 to 5 year old tree that's
Mhm.
very scrawny and you're worried about it every spring with the hard freeze
Mhm.
coming. I think I can survive a hard freeze now. 20 years into ministry, but there's still plenty of incompetent days.
Yeah. Yeah. Casey, talk to us a little bit about some of the cultural challenges that you're up in the Northeast,
Yeah.
and my perception of the Northeast is this godless pagan land. No, I'm kidding. But for a lot of folks, it feels that way. Um, Talk to us about, what you've noticed that's different, and are those differences insurmountable, or what?
Yeah, yeah. Chris asks me this most times I share with his Harding group. And it's a great question. I think it's just helpful to name the fact that, yeah, growing up in Arkansas and Mississippi, it is helpful to identify the political landscape
Hmm.
and realize that red states obviously just tend to function differently than blue states.
Sure.
And certainly Delaware is a very blue state, and further in the Northeast is in general blue. And again, this is why being a campus missionary really pays off, because if you're a missionary, then to me, you don't get too caught up in red or blue. You are here in whatever culture God has placed you, and you're going to love and serve the students in my situation that are here.
Mhm.
And guess what? There's plenty of blue students, at the
Sure.
University of Delaware. There's plenty of, Christians that are, more red leaning, and that's okay,
Hmm.
obviously, too. My biggest issue that I mentioned, and I always like giving a shout out to Lee Camp and Mere Discipleship, is just we don't want tribe to become more important than Jesus. We saw that fail with the Civil War. We've seen it in the Rwandan genocides that Camp talks about. If we let those become too important, then we lose track of our real hope in Jesus. And so, I still get a little anxious, get a little nervous about red and blue things, sometimes.
Yeah.
But in general, I know that my ultimate hope is in Jesus, and I'm trying to convey that to students in whatever blue or red culture, I find myself in. So I think it's helpful to acknowledge the political landscape, but then see that, of course, hope in Jesus transcends that, and it's not a deal breaker either way.
Yeah. I've been, and maybe it's just Harding. I'm working on an episode right now where I share some reflections on Generation Z,
Mm,
because the public perception of Gen Z, at least maybe in the Southern culture that I have lived in all my life, the public perception of Gen Z is, they go off to college to become activists, and they're coddled, and they need all these extra accommodations and this, that, and the other. And sure, there's some of that. Sure, there's some of that. But what I've seen is a group of people that are in some ways pretty similar to how I was as a freshman 20 years
yeah,
ago. And I've seen them also just feel somewhat exacerbated at the, you know, political polarization that many of us can, myself included, can, become susceptible to.
yeah,
Um, I've seen them long for, just peace and, simplicity of life, and, want just to be left alone and do the good work that God has called them to do.
yeah,
And that's encouraging to me.
yeah. Amen. Amen. Yeah, I think the other big thing that just hits me here, and there's plenty of churches in Delaware, northern Delaware here, Newark area. There's still plenty of churches, but I can certainly sense that Christianity is not in the majority here. And I
Mhm.
think one of my current apprentice from Alabama, and sometimes our Christian schools, and certainly growing up in Arkansas, at Mississippi, at Ole Miss, you kind of feel like Christianity is still in the majority. And you feel like, hey, I'm okay. I've got a lot of support here, and we can be tempted to think at the very least that we are in a Christian bubble, even if we aren't. And certainly that bubble pops when you get outside the South.
Mhm.
And we have good support here still at UD. But you can just tell that not everybody's on board with Christianity, and that's okay. It allows us to be a little more adaptable, a little more flexible, a little more humble, and say, okay, well, we're just going to find where we can serve. God, I mean, God has helped Christians for 2,000 years deal with way worse than what I have to deal with at Delaware.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think staying humble and accepting that, yeah, we're not the biggest voice, we're not the loudest voice, but we can still be a loving voice and a gentle, humble voice, and we'll find our way. God will blessed are the whatever we are, peacemakers or meek, whatever hunger and thirsting for righteousness we're doing here. God's going to bless us. He's going to take care of us and help us find students, and we do. It is beautiful to see the international students that are just looking for friendship and English conversation partners, ready to read the Bible. And our American students, a few have a church background, a few have had some church hurt, and but they see several ministries here at UD that just love students, care about students, and are just trying to help them figure out, what they believe and offer the Christian worldview as the great hope that we think it is.
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. Casey, wrap us up here. What's one final push you'd like or encouragement you'd like to give us?
Yeah, yeah. You know, I would really like, for the parents and the church leaders, members listening to this. Uh, I know not everybody's ready to ask their daughters, sons and daughters, grandsons, granddaughters to think about going into full-time ministry. But I am asking this group that's going to listen to this, uh, what's keeping me from encouraging the next generation to consider a life in full-time ministry and to try and wrestle with what fears do we have that are preventing us from, walking by faith and not by sight. It's unfortunately amazing to me how our gut tends to let us down. And just like, we've just kind of hindered people from considering what God may want them to do because, yeah, our parents, grandparents, we want what's best for our kids, but still that's often walking by sight and not by faith. And so praying for the next generation, and then for the next generation itself, just I got to be honest and say, yeah, I want you to read my book, and I'm going to show you the suffering that me and my wife and have gone through. And I got to give a shout out to my wife because she paid a heavy price physically, mentally, and emotionally through some health issues. But we've suffered a good bit, and I think that's in there to help you count the cost. But I think, as I told you earlier, we do, and I'm a Lord of the Rings guy, so I got to bring it up. We need a few more, hobbits that are willing to take the ring to Mordor. And I hate to make that comparison in some ways, because I'm not saying full-time ministry is always going to Mordor, but
Mhm.
there are moments, yeah, when it's going to be hard, you're gonna suffer. But Jesus tried to warn his disciples all the time to count the cost. And so I do want you to count the cost. So just read the story and let God, see what God wants to do with you with that. Because we need help. We need more ministers for current churches, and we certainly need, ministers for a new generation to help us plant new campus ministries and new churches.
Yeah. Casey, appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Mm.